Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We are here to recap Week 7 of SEC Baseball. Week 7, Mark, we are halfway through the regular season, believe it or not, and I know that you don't believe it. I don't believe it. It is just the way it is. This is how time works, and we have to, we have to accept that as much as I don't want to.
We're the mid-season mark.
I know we're getting to Nerdcast season, Mark. Your life is about to take on a different tone coming up. You're going to be enmeshed in RPIs and DSRs and quad records and things of that nature, which is a fun time of year. So that is while I am a little bit shell shocked that we're already at the halfway mark of the regular season, I am excited to be in the second half of the season where we can actually start to have conversations about this kind of stuff.
Do some analysis and have some data that's actually meaningful, right? Because up until this point, we're doing a whole lot of projecting, and we still are, but it's less so now that we have some sample size to kind of dig into. And I do think, I mean, Kendall, Aaron, and I met earlier today to just kind of do a rough draft of what this whole bracket's going to look like, and it is interesting. You look at the RPI, and some of them look really, really solid, right? You think, okay, well, this agrees with my opinion of this team. And then there's some of them, largely because they played very poor non-conference schedules, and this is not where this team is going to end up. So what do you do with those kind of teams? And that's, and a couple of those are in this league. So it's going to be interesting to see how all that shakes out. How much do you climb? How much or how much is already too far gone to really get back up to where these teams expect to be. So, and that's a really fun part about the first few weeks of conference season, because they're so different pre-conference schedules, right? And then when you get the conference play, and it's more it's more apples to apples and who you're playing, even in the unbalanced world, that it's we start to be able to make some judgments, and after this weekend, we certainly have a lot to talk about as we try to evaluate these teams.
Yeah. I found it notable, before we get into some of the specific results, I found it notable that there were 7 sweeps out of the 8 series. Like, the answer for you might be no, because the answer might be no for me as well. Like, do you have any sort of theory as to why that might be? I don't know that I do. Like, because it would be one thing if all of the sweeps occurred with home teams sweeping. It's like, okay, well, going on the road is always a tough thing to do, but that wasn't the case. It was kind of about half and half.
Yeah, it was 3 on the road.
Yeah. So like, I don't know that I have any sort of takes about why that is. I think it might just be one of those weird statistical quirks that just kind of happen. But I'm curious if you have something more enlightening than that, or if you're with me.
I do think momentum is real, and once a team starts believing, and the opposite is true, that there's some fragility there when things don't go your way, and as we see, once a team feels like they're hot, and it doesn't always last very long, as we saw. I mean, we had several instances where teams got swept and then turned around and did the sweeping the following week, and that's, I guess that's the new norm, and it's going to make folks like us who try to project what's going to happen almost impossible, right? Because basically it's net from week to week.
Yeah, I feel like we had a year like this. I don't know that it was last year. It might have been 2 years ago, where we had a lot of sweeps, but it was a lot of home sweeps, and I think we kind of just brushed it off as, that's going to happen when you go on the road occasionally, and so I don't know, but it is interesting. Let's start off with a sweep where you spent part of your weekend that I think was notable. That's Mississippi State sweeping Ole Miss. For Mississippi State, no Ryan McPherson, no problem. Apparently, at least for this weekend, because they really did stifle the Ole Miss offense from largely from start to finish, and they got a good outing from Tomas Valinkis, which is not in and of itself a surprise. He is, we just turned in our information we'll give the listeners a little bit of a heads up. Like, we're turning in information for SEC Pitcher and Player of the Year at the midseason point, and he's our midseason Pitcher of the Year because he's the overall numbers are great, and he's yet to give up an earned run in conference play. So that's about as good as it gets. But they also got good stuff from Charlie Foster, I thought, in his return to the weekend rotation after being out of it for a few weeks. He was in McPherson's spot on Friday, and then Duke Stone did a nice job, I felt, in the finale as well. So even without McPherson, they did a really nice job. And I felt like, Mark, and this is where I'll turn it over to you. I felt like the comeback in the 9th inning of that opener for State really felt like it set the tone for the rest of the weekend. And really, you talk about momentum. That felt like a situation where MSU just grabbed the momentum and ran off with it for the rest of the weekend, basically.
You're exactly right. I mean, that was Ole Miss chance right there. Hunter Elliott was really good on Friday. He pitched his heart out, and then I guess it was the 6th inning. Mississippi State got some things going and kind of chased him. But up until then, he had been dominant. And I do think that the wind was blowing in, and that really it helped Mississippi State's pitching because Ole Miss is so homer reliant. But it really forced Ole Miss to try to score without home runs, and they just were not able to do it. They need Ole Miss is a team. They need some walks, and they got a few of those, but they need homers to come after those walks because if they need to have 3 hits in an inning to score, they're not going to score a lot. At least not the way this lineup is built right now. You mentioned Charlie Foster, and that was another key to the weekend because we didn't know what we would get from him. He started on Sundays the first started on the weekend the first two series, and didn't go real deep in either one, and had not started on the weekend since. With McPherson out, you had a couple of options. You could push everybody up, or you could insert someone in. And they inserted Foster in, which was an interesting thing. But Brian O'Connor said something interesting in the post game. We asked about why Foster and what led into that decision. And he said that Foster had been continuing to improve after getting taken out of the rotation, and part of that was he just really wasn't healthy, and they felt like they rushed him back a little bit, maybe before he was ready for that, for that responsibility. That in hindsight they would have liked a couple more weeks maybe to let him ease back into it. But the season started when it started, and they hoped he was ready, and he looked really good. I mean, he was filling the zone. The knock on him is just he hasn't been able to throw strikes. I think he had like 12 walks in 12 innings all year, and came in, and I don't think he walked anybody. And it wasn't just not walking people. I mean, I look up at one time and he'd thrown 18 pitches and 14 strikes or something like that. Right? I mean, it was just strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, making them put the ball in play and hit it into the air, and the wind would knock it down. And it was a really good strategy. And because he was able, I mean, they basically threw their third best starter against Elliott and still won.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you're really set up well for the rest of the weekend, even though, Ole Miss brought Townsend back. He had missed I guess a start he threw like maybe 1 inning in Texas. So he was able to come back, and I didn't see that day, but I understand he pitched pretty well. But Mississippi State was just better, and that's a really good team. I'm writing something now on them and just talking about how well-rounded the team is. You look around the league, and you can poke holes in just about everybody, right? There's something that they need to get better at. Other than getting McPherson back healthy, I don't know what to point to. Maybe bullpen, although it was really good this weekend. But I came away after seeing Mississippi State. I saw them opening day, and they're so much better now. It's a really good team. They got Georgia coming in this weekend. Top 5 matchup. That will be a lot of fun. But if you're going to beat Mississippi State, they're going to make you earn it because they hit all through the lineup. They've got multiple options. And also pitching wise, they're pitching well as anyone.
Yeah,
but yeah, Mississippi State's they're real. They're playing at an elite level right now.
Yeah, I've been kind of maybe flippantly just saying that Texas is the most well-rounded team in this conference, and that might still be true. I'm not necessarily saying I'm coming off of that, but I think I've been a little too. Why I say flippant is just because it may actually be Mississippi State that is the most well-rounded team when you take a longer look at it, and so really
they're the top two
stuff
for me.
I think they've separated themselves a little bit in the group. And on the Ole Miss side, like, I just kind of think this is who they are. I mean, I think they can, obviously, that they're still capable of winning a lot of SEC games. Like, this is not I'm not negging them for losing, getting swept in this series, but because they still have a lot going for them, but they're just going to have games where this happens. We've talked about it a lot already. We've talked a ton about it, just the feast or famine nature of their offense. And we saw it this weekend, 6 run-ins in 3 games off of, oh, by the way, scoring 2 against Memphis in the midweek, which is probably as damaging a stat as the 6 runs in 3 games against Mississippi State. So I think this is just going to be a little bit not too different from last year, right? Where they had some weekends where it just didn't work. They had some weekends where their offense looked like you couldn't pitch to it. And then ultimately they showed both of those things kind of equally in the regional last year, where, they end up coming up a run short against Murray State in a game in which they they hit about 1 billion home runs and struck out about 1 billion times. And that just, there was probably no more fitting way for that season to end. And I think this season is kind of just more of the same. And if anything, maybe is a little bit of a step back, at least right now, because you have a guy like Austin Foley, who was such a big part of it last year, is really scuffling at the plate, right? So if anything, maybe this year's a little bit of a step back from that, just because the guys who were hot last year are not as hot so far this season. So, I think that's kind of just inherent to who they are as a team.
Yeah, they're just not hitting enough. I mean, they're hitting 210 in conference play.
Yeah, not good enough. Just not good enough. One team that very much was good enough over the weekend, Mark, was Alabama. They another rivalry series sweep. They sweep Auburn. You were there for part of that series as well, kind of let's call it the second half of that series. And this one follows a little bit of a similar storyline path as the Mississippi State Ole Miss series did, in that Alabama did a really nice job with Auburn's offense, but the difference for me is that I don't see Auburn's offense necessarily being the same as Ole Miss's offense in terms of them being a little bit of a one-trick pony. I don't necessarily see Auburn's offense as one that you can shut down that same way, and yet here we are with a tough weekend. So I don't know if this is a sign of something larger here for Auburn's offense, or if this was just a one weekend thing where they just got outplayed, which obviously can happen. But that was the story for me, was the way Alabama took care of the Auburn offense. Because if you had told me going into the weekend that Alabama's going to sweep Auburn, and you told me guess how this happened, I would have assumed that Alabama's offense actually did a number on the pitchers not named Jake Marciano. And as it turned out, it was the other way around, that it was Alabama got it done with pitching, which I find really fascinating. So I'm curious for your takes on that series as well.
Yeah, Alabama played really well this weekend. They pitched it, they fielded it, which that has not been a strength.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
I mean, with diving catches, with plays that earlier in the year they would just miss on, they made those plays this weekend, and they hit enough. It's not a overly physical lineup, but they hit 276 in conference play. That's tied for 4th in the conference. So, and certainly if they're going to pitch the way they did, which that's how they that's how they beat Auburn. It was run prevention, and they got some clutch hits. And they also hit a couple of home runs, and that's something that Auburn is not doing, at least not in conference play. I think they've hit 3 homers in conference play all year, something like that. And I do think that's a lineup that could use more thump. They've got some good bat to ball skills. They've got guys that are going to be able to put some pressure on you and run a little bit. But they need. I felt like Rembert and Freilich had good weekends, and after that, Auburn struggled to mount anything. So, pitching wise, I think Auburn was fine. I mean, Marciano didn't have his best day Friday, but I'm not worried about him. But the other two, Sanders and Petrovic, they were good. I mean, and then behind them, really everybody, and they pitched fine in relief other than Brewer, who kind of lost it on Sunday, just lost his own. I think he walked 3 and had 2 wild pitches, and that's how Alabama scored the winning runs. But other than that Auburn played fine. I think the interesting nugget with Auburn is Alvarez, who's been so good in midweek. When do you move him to the rotation? And maybe it's this week since they've got a Thursday, Saturday. I saw that Christian Chatterton is listed as the starter against Georgia Tech Tuesday. So maybe Alvarez gets the ball Thursday. You know, it's short rest anyway. That would make sense. And he's been really good, and certainly has weekend starting history from last year. Started a super regional game. So I'm not particularly worried about them on the mound, but they've got to show a little bit more offense. That was surprising for me. I expected no knock against Alabama. They're pitching really well, but I thought Auburn would have more success than they did.
I don't know if this is necessarily was a factor or too much of a factor in this weekend's result. You'd be able to tell me better than I would be able to say, but one of the other nitpicks I kind of have with Auburn is that they feel a little light in the bullpen. You know, like you've got guys that, like, Hetzler's obviously really proven they like Garrett Brewer. I think LJ Cormier has, if anything, kind of overachieved their expectations for him. But when you're stacking up bullpens side by side, it just strikes me as a bullpen where it's a little light on really like shutdown guys when you compare it to some of these other bullpens that can just bring in, you know, arm after arm after arm that's in there, you know, pumping big time stuff and, you know, shutting offenses down. And Auburn's got some pitch to contact going on in the bullpen. And does that end up mattering in May when it's 92 degrees outside and the ball is like coming off like a trampoline off the bats? Like, does that end up being something that ends up hurting them? That's, you know, hasn't necessarily so far, but is something I've thought about a little bit.
Well, certainly compared to Texas or to Mississippi State or some of they've got more velo coming out of the pen for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see how much that plays. But one thing I do want to add is just on Alabama, they had a tremendous crowd. I mean, I got there Saturday, and that was as full as I may have seen that park. I mean, certainly, you know, the regional, they had a huge crowd. I wasn't there, but just walking into it, they had an impactful, meaningful atmosphere with the crowd. And that's not, you know, that's something they've been striving for. And to get that, it's a huge step in the right direction. They got to continue to, you know, to keep that up. But it was back again. I had a good crowd on Sunday as well. And I know when you have the Alabama-Auburn game, you get a lot of casuals, but hopefully they enjoyed themselves and we'll come back and make a habit of it. Because once you have that you know, that positive experience at a ballpark, you know, hopefully you continue to come back, and that's only going to help a program like that. It's really tried, you know, sometimes vainly tried to generate excitement for, you know, for this sport and not the oblong one. So that was a, you know, I guess a step in the right direction this weekend.
Yeah, and there's other evidence that like that can be done. Like you are not locked into being who you are from a fan support standpoint. I mean, we've seen some of these atmospheres. Like Auburn was not a place where that you would have thought of as like one of the better fan atmospheres in the league. And now look at them. You know, I think Georgia has improved their fan atmosphere quite a bit.
Doubt. And of course,
in
Tennessee
the
is the obvious
right.
thing.
That's the gold standard of right. So you can do this. Like, you are not locked into being who you are from a fan support standpoint. So it's a great point, because that is the knock a little bit on the Sewell Thomas experience, is that you just don't know. You don't know if it's going to be much of an atmosphere, but it sounds like it was one heck of an atmosphere over the weekend, which is great news.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk Florida and Arkansas, Mark. That also caught attention. Arkansas scores 14 runs in 3 games, which doesn't sound like an extremely low total, but it is when you struggled to string together outs as a pitching staff, which was the thing Arkansas struggled with over the weekend. They didn't really get great starts from anybody. Gabe Gackle left in the second. Dietz and Fisher also had relatively short starts, so it was a lot of bullpen innings and just not able to string together enough outs. So when you feel a little bit light on the mound, or it puts some extra pressure on the offense, and this Arkansas offense has just not necessarily proven to be one that is going to excel when they have to win games that way. I think they can probably do it on occasion. Like they've got talented players, they've got guys who have done it here and there, but they're not one of these lineups that's just that kind of has this quality of where they're just like a machine. They've had these slip ups this season where they just haven't necessarily produced, and that it came back to bite them a little bit over the weekend. And kudos to Florida, because you got to go win the game still. But they got it done in an environment where a lot of folks don't necessarily go in there and have a ton of success. Even Arkansas has played a lot of mediocre to bad baseball in the past, and it's not a lot, but they've played some and have gotten wins, like because they just find a way to win home games. And that wasn't the case over the weekend. So Florida obviously deserves a ton of credit for that.
Yeah, it's always been a tough place to play. And they beat Mississippi State, first weekend of conference play.
Right.
That's a really good team. So that shows you what they're capable of. But, yeah, they didn't play well. They hit a few home runs, which is kind of interesting, but just weren't able to pitch well enough, in my opinion. I mean, it was against a Florida team that Alabama was able to really handcuff them offensively. I know Lawson didn't play for a lot of that, but I thought Arkansas would have more success on the mound than they did. Certainly with all that talent. So Arkansas goes to Auburn this weekend, and it's going to be interesting. Both teams got swept. Both teams high expectations. Were top 5 heading into the week, and plummeted in the polls based on having a rough 3 games. It's kind of one of those where was this just an anomaly? Everyone can have a bad weekend, or is this concerning that this is kind of who they are, right? And then the other side of this is Florida played pretty poorly in Tuscaloosa last weekend, got swept, got no hit, and then come out and go into incredibly difficult place to play against a top 5 team and just kick ass. And that is, when you look at Florida, you see all that frontline talent, all those premium draft picks, and you're just kind of teased with the talent. It's just, are they consistent? Are they maybe consistent's not the right word. Are they able to turn that talent into production? And I feel like that with Florida, you're going to have some of these uneven results, because they can go out and sweep you, and they can also, have a really rough weekend. And what happens? Are they good enough to win if they don't play their A game? But boy, I mean, with Lawson, Sear, those guys really came to play this weekend. And when they're going, that's a tough lineup to pitch to. Last week, it just wasn't the same team. But the interesting part about them is there's just so much velocity coming out of the pen. Yeah. You mentioned, Auburn not having it. Florida should have been the first team I mentioned. I mean, those guys coming in, you're bringing just a bevy of stuff monsters at you, one after the other, and multiple times a weekend. It's a lot to deal with, and they have a good starting rotation as well. So it's an embarrassment of riches from a pitching standpoint if they throw strikes, and if they do, you're gonna have trouble scoring against them, and Arkansas did.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious. This is maybe a topic for another day. I brought it up on the main D1 baseball podcast last night with Kendall and Aaron. Does it strike you as interesting or weird or something that it seems like we're having a lot of conversations this season about teams really struggling offensively, and this has historically been a league, at least recent history, has been a league where, despite all of the arm talent, that offense has kind of won the day. Like, and now it does feel like it's been inverted a little bit. And there are a number of teams that, whether for a weekend or a couple weekends or the entire season, have come up short offensively. It just feels like we're talking more this season about Team X or Team Y struggling with offensive production more so than we really ever have. And I don't know, and this is another thing I don't really have a great theory for. I need to probably just start asking some people, but it does strike me that we're discussing that more than we ever have.
Yeah. I mean, it's especially when you're talking about really talented teams. I think part of that is you're building your team around the measurables, and sometimes the baseball skill hasn't caught up with the measurables, and because of that, you get some uneven results. And certainly that's true on the mound with strike throwing, and it's I think it's also true at the plate with just consistency with approaches. I mean, I don't know how many times I saw this weekend. I saw 4 games in 3 days. How many times guys took a pitch right down the middle and then swung at the next one, either in their eyes or at their feet, right? It's just that inconsistent approaches and missed opportunities. And I think that's what's causing these uneven results, where if you've got players sometimes less talented, but they're able to execute to their level, whatever it is, at I guess more often, and those teams are able to break through, or those players are able to break through and have success. And oftentimes it's at the result of them, knocking down the more talented team. But with Florida, if they pitch, this is a team that they can win the whole thing. And I was just kind of looking at resumes today when we were going through that exercise, and they've got a really good resume. You think about they lost to High Point, and they've had some other, got swept by Alabama. They've had some low points, but that resume looks really impressive when you stack it up with the others. And that, I'm not sure I really understood that or really had grasped that until I dove into it. But I think the committee is going to like them if they continue, even as get swept, right? Even if that continues for a little bit, because they've done so much and had success with the Florida State series and or 2 with 1 to play, and then Miami, they've got some things to really push toward, and they don't have a lot of anchors either in their resume that's really going to pull their RPI down. So I think this is a team that could get a home regional. They could, be in great position to make a run in the postseason. If you're looking for I don't know if Florida, with as much success as they had, can be a dark horse, but I don't think a lot of people are talking about them as one of those kind of elite teams, and they're not, but they could be based on how things are trending.
Yeah, I think they're just one of those teams that there's a few of these in the league this year where they took a series loss we didn't expect early on, and we just kind of like dismissed them to the back of our minds a little bit, and just say, well, that so much for that team, and then it takes a while to readjust the expectations for them. It takes a lot of winning to undo the perception of those losses.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that kind of feels like where they are. Vanderbilt swept Tennessee, Mark, and whoo boy, was this a series. Yikes. So 3 walk-offs for Vanderbilt, 3 different kinds of walk-offs. They had a 16-inning game here that ended on a suicide squeeze bunt. That game was being called by Tom Hart and Chris Burke. They had to go back for seconds on the media meal. That was something they discussed on air. So that's how long that game was. And if you're Tennessee, it's the frustrating part about it is just there were games in this series where you scored not very much and you lost. And then there was a game where you scored a whole bunch and you lost. And so, it's just the frustration of, can we buy a win? Right. Because it just felt like no matter what they did, Vanderbilt was just one step ahead of them this weekend. And they were by most measures. Vanderbilt executed better. Vanderbilt got better starting pitching. The starting pitching really kind of collapsed some for Tennessee, with the exception of, I will say, I do like the potential of the Arvidsson Coons piggyback that they threw in the opener. I do like that. Tegan Coons strikes me as the type of guy that maybe with his stuff is better suited for that kind of role where he can come in and just air it out a little bit more and not have to worry about getting deep into the game or go and do the lineup a third time or any of that kind of stuff. But the last 2 days of the series, the starting pitching just wasn't good enough. And so what you end up with is another series where we are sitting here wondering, like we have talked about with several of these other teams, where you've got a weekend here where you wonder, is this just kind of a weird weekend, or is this a sign of something larger for Tennessee? Given that nothing has, I would say my big takeaway there is that nothing has come easy for this Tennessee team this year. It just feels like they've had to work pretty hard for everything.
Yeah, they were so close to. I mean, you get walked off 3 times. I mean, we could be talking about Tennessee sweeping Vandy.
But yeah, by definition, you're close if that happens.
Yeah, right. But yeah, there are a lot of questions, and then they host LSU, and talking about a team with questions. I mean, that's a fascinating series, and then they go to Mississippi State, and that place is very challenging to win. So Tennessee's at a spot where things could get a little dicey here, right? I don't know. Because I saw them at Georgia, and I really liked the offense. I thought they would score. And it hasn't been the same as it hasn't met expectations. We'll call it that. I do think that there's a lot of good pieces, and they're going to have games where they put up double digits, and they're going to have other games where they struggle. And you hope that you're pitching well enough that you can still win those games. And I think they, for the most part, their pitching has been fine. It's been not making the clutch play at the end of the game. I mean, they've had so many close opportunities to get it done, and just I don't know if it's bad luck, and the coin's going to flip to the other side here soon, or if there's something else going on where if you keep losing close games, eventually it's not just luck, it's you, right? And on the flip side of that, Vandy, they keep walking everybody off, right? They keep finding ways to win these close games. So, you like to think these things even out, but if it becomes a trend, maybe not. The thing about Vandy is their non-conference strength of schedule is awful, and it's brought their RPI. It's just a huge anchor there. They've got like 120 RPI right now.
Something like yeah,
it's
which is an improvement over 170 last week.
Right, and sweeping somebody does help, doesn't it? But I do think that because of that, they're going to be fighting. You're going to get the storyline all year. They're fighting against the RPI.
Yep.
Because their conference record might be good, and maybe that's enough. But you think about they go to Vegas, they go to Arlington, they have all these great games, but that's really it, right? And the other teams that they brought in are not helping them at all. And that's going to make it a dicey kind of next 2 months. to watch them play, because they're going to have to really do it the hard way by winning conference games as opposed to the non-conference, because of the hole that they're in right now. And of course, this weekend helped a lot, but they're in a kind of an interesting spot. I think both those teams, even though Vandy won the series, they're still kind of in a weird spot because of the RPI hole that they're in.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's just going to be it is simultaneously still a little early to be harping on the RPI, but to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it is not too early to be able to look at the RPI and be able to forecast that this is going to continue to be an issue, because one really good weekend can jump you quite a bit. That, like, Vanderbilt jumped 50 some odd spots, but they're not going to sweep everybody, and they're going to lose. They're going to lose series, because everybody in this league loses series. So you're going to have to make up that ground, and just playing the SEC schedule is going to improve the RPI by some, but you also got to win enough games. And, like, how many is this? Is this like 2024 Arkansas? Was it 24 Arkansas? Like, where,
cost them a host spot.
Right. Where, like, and I don't know that I'm betting on Vanderbilt winning 18 SEC games like that Arkansas team did. Like, I'm not really betting on that necessarily, but is this that? Is this, holy cow, this team is a weird bubble candidate because they're 14-16, but their RPI is 55?
Yeah.
Or even 45? Like, that would even be kind of too close for comfort, right? So it is not too early to start kind of looking at the broad trends, I would say, of the RPI.
Well, you can jump 50 points if you're 170, but if you're
that's also true. That's also
there's not as much room there. So it's going to be more of a gradual climb. So I don't know. It's something we'll follow, obviously, but it's one of those where all you can do at this point is just win as many as you can and hope that that's enough.
Yeah. Quick shout out to Vanderbilt's bullpen in this series real quick before we move on. Like, it does feel like maybe they found some answers there, or they at least have some promising options there that performed over the weekend. Some of whom have been performing consistently. Like, I don't know what their expectation for Nate Schlote was going into the season, but, like, he's throwing the ball really well. They got good stuff. Obviously, they're not surprised to get good stuff from Guth and Cyber, but they got a really good outing from Tyler Baird in that 16-inning game. I think Nate Taylor has some potential as a bullpen guy. Like, it didn't work out in the rotation for him, but does his stuff play up a little bit more in a bullpen role where he can come in and just empty the tank over the course of an inning or two? I think there's potential there. Jacob Schultz is a guy they've thrown a bunch, and it hasn't gone well for him, but he threw well over the weekend. So as long as the injury bug is going to be a thing for this Vanderbilt pitching staff, and it will be for at least a little while longer, they're going to need some of this stuff to continue to happen. And they got it over the weekend. It's just a matter of, was this a one-time deal, or is this something we're going to see more of as time goes on? Teams that did not get great bullpen work, Mark. LSU takes 2 of 3 over Kentucky. And that Sunday game we need a word for this kind of game, Mark, because the SEC is really good at giving us this kind of game on a Sunday where it's just two teams trying to out-yuck each other with their bullpens. And it ends up, in this case, 17-10. Kentucky was up 7-0. Then it was 7-6. And then it was 10-6. And then it was 11-10. And then it ends up 17-10. I would love to say that I saw something in LSU this weekend that gives me that glimmer of hope that this is the start of something bigger and grander and better than what we've seen so far. But I'm not entirely sure I see that. Like, I kind of think it's still pretty damning that they fell behind 7-0 against Kentucky. And I think the story of that third game of that series was Kentucky just had a worse bullpen blow up than what LSU did. And I'm even counting Gavin Guidry in that, because it was basically a bullpen day for LSU on Sunday. And LSU just happened to get a handful more outs at key times than what Kentucky's bullpen did. And that was the story of the game there for me. Maybe you disagree, but I don't I don't. I mean, yes, you prefer to win the series than lose it, but I don't necessarily come out of here saying, "Aha, they fixed it, and here's why." I don't. I don't feel that way about it. I'm curious if you disagree or if you're with me on that.
Well, certainly you fall behind 7-0. It would have been easy with the kind of year that the kind of stretch LSU was on to just kind of mail it in, but they didn't, and they ended up getting some clutch home runs, and I think that helped that they didn't need to try to score those runs with a bunch of singles and walks that they were able to get bunches. I think that gives you a little bit of hope if that continues. Right? If they found who knows, right? If they found the magic lineup this time, they've certainly tried a lot of combinations. The pitching is concerning. Although Zach Cowan came in and pitched great, he was what they needed in that game. I guess it was Saturday's game in relief. If he can put together consistent, efforts like that, maybe he's the third starter. Right? And certainly they've got to be searching for anything until Cooper Moore gets back. Hey, let's what do we have? Who can fill that role? LSU's just an odd team, right? No one doubts the talent. They've got a lot of future pros. They're just not playing well, and it seems like on days they pitch, they don't hit, and on days they hit, they don't pitch, and it's kind of
and they never defend it that well.
Yeah,
That's
right.
the one consistent is that it seems like they don't defend it that well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. In Kentucky, I mean, Jelkin is a star. I mean, he's one of the best pitchers in the conference. Certainly eating a lot of innings for them too, which that was something going into the year. I was thinking that he would be kind of like what Liam Peterson is. He would come out and he'd strike out a bunch of guys, but he really doesn't get you that deep in the game. That was who I expected Jelkin to be, and he's not been that. Maybe he doesn't have the strikeout numbers, although he's getting his share. But he's getting some length, and that's huge for that team because you talked about the bullpen woes. I feel like that if Kentucky continues to put pressure on you offensively and get they need some power. They don't need to have to work so hard for every run, and when they get that, they're a really challenging team to deal with. So Ben Cleaver, again, it's been a season where we have all these mysteries about guys we thought we knew about who have a proven track record who just haven't been able to return to their prior levels. And what do you do with him, right? Is he just an opener now, and you hope that he can give you a few innings, and then you turn it over to the rest of the staff, or maybe you switch it up and give somebody else a chance to open, and maybe he's pitching better as the second guy, the third guy, right? His numbers aren't terrible. He's just not giving you any length, and it looks like it's really hard when it's out there. See what else with Kentucky. I do think that they've had two really challenging environments to go out and play, and they've lost both series, but they didn't get swept. I mean, they went to Oxford against a lineup that really can hit you. You talk about it. If you don't have a lot of depth in the bullpen, they can take advantage, and certainly did in LSU. You saw what happened with them Sunday. So I feel like that. Kentucky at home, they should play better and be able to mount some wins. Certainly, they swept Alabama, and that looks great now. And if they're able to do that, I think they're going to be in that hosting mix, bubble host, until they prove that they're not, right? And I think there's quite a few SEC teams in that range, and with Arkansas, with Auburn, with Alabama and Florida, and Oklahoma, A&M. I mean, there's all these teams, and we don't really know how that's going to shake out, and it might not shake out, Joe. They just may be in a scrum all year, moving a little forward and backward, and then at the end, maybe it's who did more in non-conference or who has the best collection of wins, and that'll be the differentiator of how we pick them apart.
Yeah, I'm interested in what they do with Ben Cleaver moving forward as well, and I would be inclined to say it's time to try something else if I had a lot of conviction that there was an obvious
an option
move to make.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some bullpen guys that you like. Jack Bennett was a starting pitcher at Western Kentucky on a regional team last year. Like, is that the way to go there? Do you just do a design bullpen day? But that's what this already kind of is.
Yeah.
It's like, if that's what you're going to go with, then you might as well just go with the guy who maybe one week it'll just all click back into place. And that's it feels like that's kind of what they're hoping for, is just you keep putting them out there and maybe lightning will strike and it'll all come together. And it's not a comfortable place to be, but I can understand how they've arrived at that being the best of the options.
Yeah, I can see that.
Texas swept Oklahoma, Mark. The blowout to start that series, and then a couple of extra inning wins. So if you're Oklahoma, it's a little bit like Tennessee getting swept by Vanderbilt. At least in maybe they were never going to sweep that series because of the blowout win for Texas over Oklahoma. But in 2 of the 3 games, they were right there. Could have easily won them. Yeah. Yep. Texas probably right now in its current iteration, like with the guys who are healthy, the guys who are hurt right now. Like, Texas probably the best rotation in the SEC. Like, am I missing someone there? Like, I don't think so.
They're certainly the most consistent, right?
Yeah.
And they haven't had that one day where it just doesn't where they don't get outs and the guy leaves in the second inning, right? They've been able to do that. And the thing that's really struck me with Longhorns is those 2 freshmen, Crossland and Kozart, have come in at the end of the game and just, that was the question on Texas, with Burns, with all the balls and walks and everything. When he would come in, these guys are coming in and they're filling the zone, and maybe, they're freshmen. Maybe they don't have the consistency to do that over the long haul, but Dylan Delanis did it last year. So I think this looks like the right recipe, the right role for these guys. And then you figure out what else, how Burns can help you. He's too talented to sit. What's his role going to be? And maybe it's 6th inning instead of the 8th and 9th, right? I don't know, but it's their bullpen. I have a lot more faith in them in this current setup than I did 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. And I've said it. I forget if I've said it here. I forget what I said where, but do a lot of talking these days. But I think there's a way in which this is just a silver lining for Texas, because that these freshmen are getting a lot more experience this time of year than I think they anticipated. And some of it's for reasons that they don't want, right? You don't want Thomas Burns to struggle with throwing strikes, for example. But as long as that's going to be the case, at least you're giving these freshmen some run in an early part of the season, with the hope that by the time you get to Hoover, by the time you get to a regional, by the time you get to Omaha, if they get that far, like, you can lessen the workload on the freshmen and those veterans will be in the driver's seat again. And your bullpen will just be that much deeper. Whereas there's definitely a scenario where these freshmen just kind of get their feet wet in midweeks or as low leverage guys. And then you get to Omaha and you're not sure you can trust them. Because they just haven't been exposed to the high leverage spots. Well, buddy, they have. Yeah, like, they're doing it now. So they know they can trust them. And it's just, you got to manage the workloads, and do they wear down over time? Like, all those usual freshman questions still have to be asked. But again, the hope is that they won't be carrying such a heavy load here in 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 10 weeks from now, and they can approach it a little bit differently. On the Oklahoma side, I have a number of concerns about their pitching staff right now. It seems to be backsliding a little bit. Now, the irony of that, of course, is that they actually got a pretty good Cam Johnson. The part that seemed most volatile was the steadiest thing they got over the weekend, but it didn't go well at all for Mercurius. It wasn't very good for Rager either. The bullpen didn't really throw strikes. There was I think it was the Friday game. Yeah, the Friday game, they just really didn't throw strikes in the bullpen. Caden Leone struggled to throw strikes. Jason Bowden struggled to throw strikes. And those are two guys they really, really need. So I worry a little bit when you are Oklahoma and you've got what I would call a solid offense, not a great offense. They're sitting right in the middle of the pack in terms of average in the SEC. They're next to last in home runs. So it's just kind of a good but not great offense. When you are that, like you need at the very least you need your pitching staff to be at least that good to kind of offset that. And they looked like they were going to be that early in the season, and that has backed off. Time will tell if they can stem the tide a little bit, or if this just kind of is a reversion to what they actually are, and that's going to be what Oklahoma is going to have to contend with moving forward.
Yeah. Big series for Oklahoma coming up with Alabama coming in. Alabama's obviously really hot, played great at home, but when they went to Kentucky earlier, that didn't go well for them. So which version of Alabama does Oklahoma get? And then if you're Oklahoma, I mean, they won the series over A&M. They won the series. Who was their other one? LSU. So this is their first series loss. So, yeah, I know it didn't go well. You never want to get swept, but those two extra inning losses, we could be having a completely different conversation here about them. So, and that's without getting great pitching, and that's been the strength of their team. So I do think that them playing at home, especially if they can go out and have some success against Alabama, then they're kind of right back where they were before this. And that's in position to host a regional, in position to meet all your goals for the year, to contend for the conference title, despite one bad weekend. As we've seen, no one's immune to this. Everybody's going to get hit in the jaw. Right. And even we're talking about how good Texas and Mississippi State are. Mississippi State's already lost one series. They're going to lose another one before this thing's over. So will Texas. It's just too hard, and you can't stay healthy, and you can't stay on your top game. So the point of all that is, I feel like Oklahoma's going to be fine. It's just a question of you can't let one bad week turn into two, turn into three, and so on, right? And coming back home, even though it's a hard draw, I feel like Oklahoma's got a chance to get this thing right.
Yeah, definitely that. Like, yeah, it's certainly. They've banked up so much. Goodwill is maybe not quite the right word, but just their performance early in the season, which wasn't against credibility, which wasn't against nobody. Right. So they've already banked up a decent bit of goodwill there and credibility, and we'll see where it takes them. Georgia swept South Carolina, Mark. Don't have to spend too much time here because it felt like just a pretty comprehensive performance on Georgia's part. They won it. To say something we haven't said a ton over the last several years, they won it with pitching the first couple of days of the weekend.
Guys.
Right, including one game in which
deep starts.
Right. Dylan Vigil gave them a third of an inning in one start, and they just turned it over to Paul Farley and Matt Scott, and just those guys really dominated. So, and we get that the South Carolina offense is really fighting it. Like it's very well might be the worst lineup in the SEC just based on performance so far. So, there's that baked into it. I get that, but still, this is not this is not a program the last several years that has been able to win a lot of games that way. So winning them against anyone in conference play is certainly notable. I guess the only question I have with Georgia from that standpoint is just they have a little bit of an issue where I think with Vigil, it's like they're still going to run him out there next week because he's been pretty good otherwise. But I do wonder about the Kenny Ishikawa of it all. He just hasn't been all that effective since coming back from his foot injury. Is he still maybe he's still physically on the spectrum of working his way back, and maybe we just need to be a little more patient. Or there is another scenario where it is time to do we explore Matt Scott in the rotation? Because this is not the first time Matt Scott has had an outing like this. Like, do we explore that? Do we look at something else? Is it time for that? That is kind of the coming out of the weekend. That is the question I think I have for Georgia. Yeah.
And Justin Bird, man, he's been great.
Yeah, he's really good. Yeah.
I mean, he's maybe too valuable to move out of that multi-inning relief role, but man, he's been a really pleasant surprise this year. I think the other thing I'll point out here is South Carolina was in all those games.
Yeah.
They are playing, they're competitive, right? They're able, and they're going to beat some people. But Georgia, especially at home, they were able to make just enough plays. And that's what you got to do, right? You don't get the deep start, you hang around, and you're able to get the clutch, either clutch out or the clutch hit or both when you need it. And if you're a team like Georgia that's trying to, climb the RPI again, they're 40 because they didn't do a whole lot in non-conference. So you've got to win all these games. You can't lose home games, and you get an opportunity to do well in conference because they didn't do much in non-conference. You have to offset that by doing extra good in conference, right? And that's what getting a sweep at home is that's the way to do that. And then they go to Mississippi State. If they're able to win that series in Starkville, then all of a sudden the RPI problems are probably non-existent at this point. So that's the trade-off, right? You're going to play all these home games against teams that you should beat. Well, you're going to get hurt by the RPI, and you have to do well in conference. And if you do well, then it's fine.
Yeah, certainly. There's history suggests there is a large number of teams that have made that bet and it has paid off.
Yeah, Tennessee does it every year.
Right, but it occasionally doesn't pay off, and that's when you have tough, difficult questions to answer about your approach. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. The final series, Mark, Texas A&M sweeps Missouri.
Yeah.
Wild game on Friday in this. This was not a game on Friday I expected to be locked in on, especially once A&M was up 10-1. I kind of checked out of that game and said, okay, I kind of see where that's headed. I can move on to focus on other things, focus on other games. But Missouri went on a one heck of a run on the comeback trail, fell a little short, 11-9. And then from there, A&M just really controlled the last two games of the series. So A&M continues to kind of sneakily, I would say, maybe still the best offense in the SEC. Certainly the numbers suggest they're in that mix. In conference play, they're leading the league in hitting by 10 percentage points. They're tied for third in home runs in the conference. So on balance, very well might be the best lineup the league has. And I don't know that if you had blindly just said, hey, Joe, like who's leading the SEC in hitting in the 9 conference games, I don't know. I think I would have had A&M fairly high up there, but I don't know that I would have landed on A&M. So they feels like they've kind of snuck up a little bit on me as far as just how good they are offensively this season.
Yeah, I really love that offense. I mean, they've got weapons. It has some length, got power, and the question for them is just pitching. And I don't know. It's obviously, if you have starters that aren't giving you what you want to insert somebody else, and I'm not sure who they would bring in. Just kind of looking at it, but yeah, it's going to be interesting as they continue to face challenging competition. Are they just able to outscore people? Maybe they can, right? But that's a tough way to live. From a Missouri standpoint, I mean, missing Pimental, that hurt.
Yep.
Yeah, he was. I don't know if they expect to get him back this week. They really need him because starting pitching had really been their strength, and it wasn't this weekend. So, that they are better. The question is when they face these top lineups like this, and you have to outscore people to beat them. Can you win a slugfest? Can you go out and win a shootout? And the answer is probably no. So they really need to pitch and keep it close and try to get the clutch hit, right, and win games that way. More 6-5 than 10-9.
Yeah.
And if they can do that, then they can be competitive and win a few more games.
Yep. The A&M part of it, the concern about the pitching is, to me, it's a little bit twofold. I do have the concern about quality in the rotation, but I also have a separate concern about they only seem to really be comfortable with about 6 guys. And it's still pretty early in the season to be that narrow, especially when you've already lost Josh Stewart, right? Yeah. So that's a little, as long as it continues to work and win games, like, hey, we saw Texas do this last year basically right up until it didn't work, right? Like,
right.
and they got caught in a regional against a really good UTSA team, and that was all she wrote. But you can do this, but it does become a little bit of a high wire act if you're really relying on a pretty narrow group of pitchers. And so far to this point of the season, A&M is.
Yeah, and that's the question, right? Quality and quantity. And with them, they've got some freshmen that maybe, will continue to develop and be an answer. But you're right. That's the knock on them. And I do think that they're going to, because of that lineup, they're going to be in every game. They're going to have a chance to make your life miserable as an opponent. It's just really hard if you got to score 8 runs to win, and that's kind of what we're looking at right now.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. All right, Mark. That seems like an episode. I think we've covered the landscape there. Just a weird week. I don't know that we'll have another weekend this season where we have 7 sweeps out of 8 series. It seems extremely unlikely. Yeah. But that's what we had. But there was still plenty to chew on, and enjoyed doing so with you. But that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I want to thank once again Mark Etheridge for joining me on this and every episode of Highway to Hoover, and thank you, the listeners, for listening.